It's been over 1400 days since I first started epicseven, and there's something that I've always wanted to do. With thousands of RTA matches thrown, guild wars lost, accounts bricked, and rift runs failed, it's finally time for me to break down each and every single character in epicseven. This means we'll explore their playstyle, what their skills do, their possible builds, what I'll be using, their PvP/PvE use cases, and their pros and cons. But without further ado, let's get into it. With Aram officially joining epicseven as the newest unit, she's already shown great promise in how effective she'll be. While HARSETTI mains may be in shambles, most players are celebrating and many are pulling for her thanks to her fantastic character design. To explain, however, Aram is a fire soul weaver with a truly unique kit. Her passive allows her to manipulate battle by granting powerful buffs based on who takes the first turn, and this makes her a flexible character at the very minimum, and in ideal cases a standout counter to characters like HARSETTI, Lidica, or other characters of that nature. This is because Aram will typically start and provide your team with 3 turns of immunity right from the beginning, and with this, in today's video we'll be diving into her kit and exploring how she performs across different types of content. As always though, if you found this video helpful or enjoyable, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. But without further ado, let's break down everything you need to know about Aram. To start, let's talk about her skills. Skill 3. Aram's third skill is the focus of her support abilities and excels at buffing or stalling a fight. With the skill, Aram targets an ally, excluding herself, granting exploiting weak points, resetting all their skill cooldowns, and boosting their combat readiness push by 100%. Notably, this ability ignores any cooldown increase or reduction effects, making it a reliable tool in any situation, assuming that Aram can move during her turn. From what we've seen from her showcase, this does mean that a character like Dark Corvus can immediately use his abilities, and it is quite funny to see such a high damage ability used at the start of battle. Skill 2. Her second skill is a passive that provides value before the first turn is even taken. At the start of battle, if the enemy takes the first turn, all allies on your team gain immunity for 3 turns. That said, if someone on your own team takes the first turn instead, all teammates instead will receive an effectiveness buff for 3 turns. Additionally, if Aram's allies suffer a full team-wide attack, it then triggers Warming Up, which grants vigor and speed buff to all allies for 2 turns and generates 10 souls. Skill 1. Lastly, Aram's first skill offers basic utility and healing to keep your allies healthy throughout a fight, and with this, Aram will also attack the enemy by stirring up sand with a 35% chance to inflict stun for 1 turn. Now, in terms of its sustain, after using this attack, she heals all allies based on her own max HP, offering consistent recovery throughout the fight, similar to that of Maid Chloe, though slightly more reliable. For Aram's build, this can vary depending on what you need from her. If used exclusively against HARSETTI teams, her speed is less relevant. However, if you're trying to avoid tricky setups where HARSETTI is fast, I would still build a slight bit of speed onto Aram just in case. That said, when used as a general buffer, you'll typically want to avoid her being too slow. Despite this though, going too fast will also cause issues with speed tuning, meaning that overall this really does depend on your team and their speeds as a whole. Regarding sets, most standard builds aim to use some combination of speed plus a defensive set like health, defense, or resist, and otherwise some have opted for slower builds on counter or protection set, with the same options for defensive 2-piece sets or immunity as well. Stat-wise, Aram's build can vary depending on her intended role, but for tankier setups, especially on speed set, you'll generally want around 20,000 plus HP, 1500 plus defense, and at least 200 speed. Counter builds follow a similar structure, but since counter set doesn't provide any stat bonuses, you'll naturally lose out somewhere, whether it's speed, HP, defense, or effect resistance. As for speed and effect resistance, these are the most unpredictable and variable stats in Aram's kit. Some builds aim to end fights quickly, taking advantage of her 3-turn immunity, so effect resistance isn't always needed. But in longer battles, once that immunity wears off, effect resistance becomes important to stop her from being controlled. That's why effect resistance is still being considered, depending on your intended matchup and your playstyle. When it comes to right side stats, your choice will largely depend on how you plan to use Aram. HP percent neck, ring, and boot will definitely work for slower tank-focused builds that are meant to protect squishy teammates, but for teams that expect longer fights, you might opt for HP percent on neck, effect resistance for the ring, and HP percent boots to help Aram avoid debuffs once her initial immunity wears off. Alternatively, if you're still aiming for a slightly faster build that maintains bulk, the combination of HP percent neck, HP percent ring, and speed boots strikes a nice balance. The triple HP percent setup is especially effective for raw survivability or when used with something like protection set, while the ER focus variation can see better usage when used on teams that need Aram to stay functional with something like counter set and also the inability to be debuffed. Next, we need to talk about Aram's real value in PvP, and more specifically her role as a counter to HARSETTI. Since HARSETTI always takes the first turn, Aram becomes an incredibly effective answer by granting your entire team 3 turns of immunity, completely negating any non-strip, including debuffs. If you're running Aram on a protection set, that's synergy becomes even stronger, as many HARSETTI builds rely on injury, which gets blocked by the initial barrier from said set. To add to this, Aram pairs perfectly with Argent Wave's Hua-Young, as the initial skill 3 or skill 1 cast from HARSETTI will trigger Aram's skill 2, which just so happens to be a non-attack skill once triggered as well. This makes Aram one of the premier Strays plus Hua-Young offenses in normal arena, and in case you were curious, this does end up dealing equal to, if not more damage than the Young Senya Mort variation. In RTA, she operates more as a secondary opener, however, which will then allow your first opener to freely cycle between abilities before Aram then pushes them forward again with skill 3, which not only boosts their combat readiness, but also fully resets their cooldowns too. On a different note, if your team goes first, Aram provides a team-wide effectiveness buff, which also helps increase the chances of landing debuffs, which can definitely be helpful if you're using her alongside strong openers. Now, while she might not be a strong first pick staple or a meta-defining unit, Aram still holds value as a solid reactive pick in real-time arena. In RTA, she serves more of a specialized but dependable support role, and this can be especially handy in drafts that value flexibility and don't plan to ban out HARSETTI. Now, to be clear, her utility may not always be flashy, but she will be a more consistent 5th pick ban, and therefore valuable in the right setups, though this value can be debated as a lot of characters are good when picked in the 5th slot position. When it comes to PvE content in Epicseven, Aram finds herself in a bit of an awkward spot. While her skill 3 offers a powerful ally reset and CR push, most farmable PvE fights don't demand cooldown resets, especially when team comps are built around set rotations. To add to this, she is a fire element character, which means that her main value comes from fighting against bosses like Golem or content like the Earth Expedition. But admittedly, these are modes that do require less help to figure out and are just generally easier as a whole. As a result, this can cause Aram to feel less versatile or useful in general, but this isn't to say that she doesn't have value. Now, additionally, while vigor and speed buffs from Aram can boost both damage and survivability, the speed buff in particular can complicate turn tuning in certain situations. Now, although it's generally beneficial, there are specific fights, especially in PvE, where precise speed tuning in something like a Rift is essential. A poorly timed speed buff can cause your allies to act too early, have buffs expire too soon, or simply mess up carefully planned rotations. So while helpful, it's definitely a factor that needs to be considered when building around Aram. Additionally, bosses are immune to crowd control effects like the stun on her skill 1 in most cases, and her skill 2 passive, while interesting for adapting to turn order, can hold debatable value in PvE, since the benefit of 3-turn immunity can seem either overkill or wasted when strippers are in play. That said, her healing and team utility can offer some sustain in longer fights or abyss floors where timing matters, but in general, she's outclassed by more specialized PvE soul weavers like Tamarin, Angelica, or Destina, who offer stronger sustain, defense, cleanse, or combat readiness control tailored to boss mechanics. Despite this, however, Aram is a potential Iseria replacement in some cases, but we'll really have to wait and see if the loss of a defense break hurts in said scenarios. Overall though, Aram is viable but far from optimal for most PvE content, and as a result, we'll have to see what upcoming PvE content gets released, as currently most bosses and enemies are clearable even without her. Finally, we should talk about the pros and cons of Aram. For the pros, she is definitely one of the best HARSETTI counters, and in terms of investment, she doesn't really need too much in order to be effective. Design-wise, she is pretty interesting, as again, her kit is pretty versatile, if not maybe a bit more difficult to use in RTA. To add to this, in terms of PvP, she's some of the highest damage in arena when paired with Strays and Hua-Young. Now, as for the cons, she is technically limited, though again, this label has lost a bit of its meaning over the years, and as previously mentioned earlier, she does feel a bit difficult to draft in RTA. Now, finally, although her skill cooldown reset and her ability to give 3-turn immunity is quite helpful, this is a character that does require pretty specific speed tunings to work or well planned out strategies. Otherwise, her cooldown resetting and even her speed/vigor can sometimes feel useless. So in conclusion, if you're looking for a support unit that offers both utility and answer to HARSETTI/openers alongside cooldown resets, Aram is a fantastic pick. And of course, as a limited unit, I highly recommend grabbing her while you have the chance. As mentioned previously, she thrives in PvP content, especially as a counter to popular openers like HARSETTI and Litica, and her ability to reset an ally's cooldown while boosting their combat readiness push makes her a flexible support in a variety of team compositions, assuming that you plan around her. Again, now is a great time to pull for Aram, and with the anniversary rewards rolling in, there'll be less pressure to conserve resources, and as always, we won't know when she'll return again. That's gonna be it for today's video though, guys. Hope you guys enjoyed. As always, if you did, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, but I'll see you guys all in the next one. Stay safe, stay healthy. Good night.